Next on our agenda tonight, we have our superintendent's report, so I'll turn it over to the superintendent, Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one brief update for the committee this evening. Wanted to give you some more information about our school libraries in the light of recently expressed concerns. As I've already communicated to the committee, I think it's very important to put this in the larger context that ultimately we're here talking about delivering public education in a free society, which is always a bit of messy business. Ultimately, what's at stake here is about community standards. And I want people to know that we absolutely respect the positions that were presented at the last meeting. As we talk about all the time, it's the mission for our schools to be for all students, and all means all. And so the considerations of all of our parents are important to us. But as we have discussed, in a free society, different people have different opinions, and it's hard to find the balance between competing interests. That's what it's like to live in a democracy. We believe that the Attleboro Public Schools has had and continues to have the right approach to this particular challenge. The first thing we need is transparency. We need to be open with the community, with families, about what it is that we're teaching, what students are being asked to read, and what students have access to. I think these are very fair questions and fair concerns, and we stand ready to provide that information when asked, and make sure that people know what it is that we're doing in the schools, because if people can't trust that, then it doesn't matter what we do past that. Second, I think it's important that we respect a wide range of perspectives as a public school. And it's, from my perspective, the best way we, as an institution in our society, preserve liberty, to give people the freedom and to respect the various views, not just a dominant one. And finally, it is important to honor the wishes of parents. Right? We are entrusted with the care of their children, and we take that very seriously. And part of that is to respect that different people have different views, and we are here to provide an education that is respectful of that. We can't always do something that's going to be liked by everyone. That's an unrealistic standard. But where we have differences of opinion, we have always, or at least as long as I've worked here, and we continue to work with families and to honor their feelings about what is appropriate for their children. They are their children, the parents know best, and we respect that, and we always have, and we will continue to. And it is my sincere opinion that that is the best way to resolve any disagreements about what we should do. In this particular instance, what's at heart is, how we're looking at books. And I just want to say that there is complete agreement that between the administration of the Attleboro Public Schools and the opinions that were expressed at our last meeting, that pornography is bad for children, which is why there is no pornography in the Attleboro Public Schools, and we do not tolerate it. Right? So there's agreement on that point. Where there isn't agreement is how we define that and what a standard for it is. And that's going to always be the challenge. I think that it's important that I state for the record that from our perspective, the books that are in our libraries were selected for their literary merit, and that they are defensible as such. But I want to be very clear that in the end, while I might object to the categorization of some of the books that have been brought into question, my opinion does not matter. Right? Ultimately, what matters here is the opinions of the community, right? What parents want for their students is ultimately what matters most and what we're going to respect. So while we can have disagreements, in the end, we're going to respect the wishes of our families. I would just close these comments by just saying that while I think it would be inappropriate to require children to read books that their parents object to, which is why we don't do that, I think it is equally inappropriate to tell some families that their children can't have access books that they value and see as literature. And that's why those books should remain, and we should respect the wishes of the parents who do not want their students reading them. One final update that I have for you this evening is that we've been working with community members about our libraries for months now. And when we started that process, we realized that coming out of the pandemic, there were a lot of things that we could look at and perhaps tighten up. And we spent some time looking at our middle school libraries in particular, because we agree that when it comes to our schools K-8, that should be relatively safe places, right? That's not a place to push boundaries or to make philosophical points. We want our libraries to be safe. And so we took a hard look at our libraries, and I just wanted to report to the committee that the good news is that in 2 of our libraries at Wamsut and Brothers, we have veteran staff running those libraries who were running those libraries exactly as we have reported and as we say that they should be run, right? Which is, keeping the young adult section preserved for older students and respecting the wishes of parents as to who can access those sections. So that's exactly as we reported. At Coelho, we did realize that during the pandemic, some of the books in the young adult section had been dispersed through the rest of the library. This is in part because, unlike the other 2 libraries, we had quite a bit of turnover in staff at Coelho. And so under the conditions of the pandemic, we didn't, as a district, do a good job of making sure that new staff knew exactly how to do things the way we do them. We've addressed that. Procedures have been tightened. The young adult section has been reconstructed. And so now Coelho is like the other 2 schools, and all of our middle schools are functioning the way that they should. So that is now 100% accurate.
So since this has become more of a public issue, I guess, or been publicized a little bit in the media, has the administration received complaints about books in the library from a number of parents? Or?
Yeah, considering how much media attention there has been, both from the paper and other media sources, we were somewhat anticipating getting some responses on this. I'm here to report, though, that I've received no complaints about our libraries since the last meeting. In fact, the only people who have reached out was to check in to make sure that we weren't going to be taking books off the shelves, which I assured them that was not the plan.
So, thank you for the update. I had an email to the Sun Chronicle that was largely reported in the paper, but I think it's important to reiterate. I appreciate the way the administration has handled this. I think the way Attleboro Public Schools handles this is the appropriate way, which is to allow parents, if they don't think their children or don't want their children to check out certain books, to restrict that without judgment. But as far as restricting other families' access to books in the library, it's certainly not something that I have an appetite for, that I imagine the committee can. I mean, the committee, other members can call a special meeting, but as long as I'm chair of the committee, which I guess isn't that long, there's going to be no motion brought forward to restrict books in our libraries. I mean, that's everything that I'm against educationally and providing opportunities to learn to our children. It's not to not respect the views of parents who don't wish for their children to have access to those books. If that's their wish and their belief, I respect that, and the school should absolutely honor it. But banning books or restricting access to books that the library's staff and the administration have deemed appropriate is not something that I'll support. And if I'm off the committee and the next committee supports it, I'll be standing where you are to tell them I think they're wrong. So I appreciate the administration's stance on this.
Last time I came before this committee on the 8th, I read passages from a book called Where's Monday? Deeply disturbing passages. First there was race baiting, then there was bullying and alcohol. I have issues with bullying. I'm not going to say I hate bullies. I'm not a hater. I try not to be. But I'm not going to say I loathe or despise bullies. What I will say is I have a righteous indignation towards bullying and bullies. Because every bully out there, we all know, has a common denominator. They're cowards. Moving on. I also read an article about a rape of a minor child. This is difficult for me. A minor child. That book was available to children ages 10 to 14. Now, when I got home that night, I was anxious. I was anxious when I read it. I'm anxious right now. Now, you might ask why a 66-year-old Army veteran who served from 1974 to 1976, why did I have crippling anxiety? Why did I couldn't sleep that night? I couldn't eat the next day. I'm going to show you why. You see this? It's my granddaughter, born on the 30th of April. You see that beautiful little smile? You see that little smile? You see the innocence in those eyes? That book will take the innocence away from a child at 10 years old. You're educators. You should know this. Shame on you. Now, let's talk about this. Oh, let's talk about this. This is a book by Erica Moen and Matthew Nolan. I've seen them speak. These two are deeply disturbed people. It's my opinion. You may have another one. You're entitled to it. In this book, if you go online, there's a warning. This book was checked out by a 15-year-old freshman in this school. In it, there's some really graphic things. I'm not going to show the audience, but you can see this. You see this? You see this? You see this? It gets better. Explains how to go on pornographic sites. 15-year-old child. Now, it's also other things in here. It looks like at one point you show a girl how to masturbate. 15 years old. Shame on you. How is this educational? How is this helping? Do you think a child needs to be shown how to masturbate? Is there anybody in this audience that did not explore your body when you went through puberty? Raise your hand.
Sir, you're free to say what you want, but the
I'm going to
comments
ask
are
the
directed.
the same thing, but we know it. It's
Directed
human
to us.
biology. We don't need to be shown. Neither do our children. That's all I have to say tonight.
Thank you.
Okay. When I first heard there could be sexually explicit books in my child's library, I didn't think much of it. My daughter is 15 and she knows about sex. We've always had a very open and honest relationship. Then I was sent excerpts, and as I read them, my jaw dropped. You heard some of them 2 weeks ago. Rape, incest, sodomy, etc. In really, really explicit, obscene, violent, leave nothing to the imagination detail. And some of the books have graphics too. But then I said there's no way these books are actually in the Attleboro High School library. But sure enough, they were. These books were not from a random list some bitter person created to stir up trouble. Not only are these books in the library, but my 15-year-old minor daughter was allowed to check them out. No questions asked, no parental consent needed. You may be wondering why she checked them out. I asked her to. I needed to know firsthand if they were truly in the library and if she'd actually be allowed to take them out without my knowledge. School library books have recently become a national talking point, and to my knowledge at APS, they hadn't been an issue before. But now that I know these sexually explicit books are in my child's school library, I have a big problem with it. I'm angry that these books were so easily accessible to my daughter. I send her to school every day trusting that her safety, well-being, and education are the priority of all school personnel. Trusting that in this era of social media and internet at her fingertips, school material is one thing I don't have to worry about. My trust in the Attleboro public school system has been broken. There wasn't a policy regarding library books until this was brought to your attention several weeks ago. Because of that, 2 weeks ago, you unanimously voted to add the following to the handbook: library access. Parents, guardians who wish to restrict the access of their student to specific titles through the school library should contact the high school librarian, principal in elementary and middle schools. A full listing of each school's collection is available for review on our school website. Seriously? Your answer is to make me go through thousands of books to come up with a list to give you? And just to be clear, unlike movies, music, and video games, books do not have ratings. There is no way for me to effectively search. Let's just say hypothetically I was able to do this. Then there's also this currently in the handbook. The Sales Network connects Attleboro High School with public and school libraries in southeastern Massachusetts, allowing students to access thousands of books electronically. How can you even think this is remotely fair or even possible to ask of parents and guardians? I agree with what Mr. Sawyer said tonight about not restricting books that other families may deem appropriate for their minor children. But I feel there needs to be a more equitable policy for parents like me. How are you going to work with me to assure that my minor daughter will only have access to age-appropriate materials? How are you going to repair my trust in the school system, and by extension, all of you? I would like to know when the next policy subcommittee meeting is, as I would like to attend to offer my thoughts on how we can come to a solution that works for all families and allows access to all, while allowing parents to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've never stood before the school committee before, but after last week's meeting that I watched online afterwards, I was deeply disturbed by the material that was presented, and honestly appalled that that material exists in our school libraries. Mr. Sawyer made mention that we need to trust the Attleboro schools. There have been many things over the last couple of years that have in small ways broken my trust with Attleboro schools, which is why I pulled 2 of my students from the school, but I still have 2 students in the high school. And they'll remain in the high school until they graduate. But issues like about these books has just broken my trust more. You put a little blurb in the back of the student handbook, that's not acceptable. I mean, poll your parent. How many parents actually read the handbook? We might skim through it and sign off saying we read it. No one has time to go through all that. No one's reading that. And as a parent, myself and others, we wouldn't even know. We wouldn't even know what books to put on the list to say we don't want our children having access to these. It's available on your website. Like Jen said, we don't have time to go through thousands of books. I wouldn't even know where to start. You did mental health evaluations at school last week. You emailed the parents and said, please email back if you want your student to opt out of this. Then why is it so hard to make a list of these books that are sexually explicit, that should be rated for 16 and up, put them in a separate section, and if a child goes to check out that book, the parent is notified. My child checked out numerous books last week or 2 weeks ago. According to comments in the Sun Chronicle, the Attleboro Schools has a long-standing policy of allowing parents to control their child's access to books and other library materials. Where's my phone call? Where's my email? My child checked out these books. I haven't heard from Attleboro Schools yet to allow me to know my child had these books in her possession. I mean, the librarian mentioned to her today, hey, sweetie, you have 5 books out. They're due back by June 1st. I haven't heard from the librarian. I haven't heard from her teachers. I haven't heard from the school. Where is this long-standing policy? School committee members made remarks to the media last week that there appears to be a national grassroots movement to try to have certain books or topics removed from schools, and that the small group of local citizens use examples of books and topics from that national grassroots movement. These books and these topics didn't come from some national grassroots movements. These books and topics came from your schools directly. And the books that weren't presented, that weren't in our possession, is because they are currently checked out by students of Attleboro schools. Other comments that were made by school committee members said the books in question are not being forced upon any students, and families have the right to limit their students' access to them as they see fit. In my opinion, it is the family's choice to determine what their students should and should not access, and the current policy and practice of the schools allows for that. And I disagree. The current policy does not allow for that. I don't see fit that my child read these books, but my child checked them out with my knowledge. So what do we do about that? How do we fix that? The policy put in place of putting a blurb at the back of the handbook is not good enough. And I mean, I didn't prepare anything to write tonight. I didn't know if I was coming up here to speak. But after the comments by Mr. Sawyers, I felt I needed to. And I'm going to keep coming here, and you're going to keep seeing my face until something more is done. And there's many parents that have reached out that I've heard from. They would like to come up here and speak, but they don't want to give their names. They don't want to give their addresses. And to be honest, that's a long, outdated practice, and something needs to be done about that. Or maybe that practice is just kept in place because we want to scare people from speaking because you don't want to hear from us. That's how I feel. We already have federal laws in place regarding obscenity in minors. And I would argue that these books are obscene. These is obscene material. I would argue that the libraries are distributing this material to our students under 16. In the law, it actually says that, for example, using a cartoon character or children's television program in the domain of a website that contains harmful or obscene material, visual representations such as drawings, cartoons, or paintings that appear to depict minors engaged in sexual activity and are obscene are also illegal under federal law. You have a book in your library that has these images of minors engaged in sexual activity. You have books that depict that. That's against the federal law. I don't know why that belongs in a school. And if there are parents out there who are watching this who want their children reading that material, we have a dozen libraries within 20 minutes of us. You can get that material anywhere. Our children are exposed to enough sexual content via media and shows and movies. We need it from the school too. You're here to educate. Speaking of movies, if you want to take your child to an X-rated movie, can they go alone? No, you have to give them permission, right? You have to go with them to X-rated movies. What about movies that are rated NC-17? Can your child go to that? If you feel it's appropriate for your child, your 16 or 15 or 14 or 10-year-old to go to that, can you take your child to the NC-17 movie? No, you can't. The movie theater says, we don't give a damn that you want to take your child to this movie. You're not allowed. It's NC-17. So how come these books that I would say are worse than NC-17 movies, we can give them out to our children, 10 years and up? You don't have a right as a parent to bring your child to those movies, but you think it's okay for them to get that material at school. I'm just sickened by all of this, and more needs to be done, and I'll be here in 2 weeks, and I'll be here again and again and again until something more is done. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to know I'm part of a grassroots movement. I guess that's what we're called now. It's absolutely ridiculous here and adults. And I'm sorry, Stephen, Mr. Withers, is it?
Yep.
Okay. It's okay that you have your opinion and that you won't support whatever you won't support, which you said earlier, right? Every single person here cares about their children, okay? And for me to sit here and listen to you say, well, I don't approve of, getting rid of certain books or banning certain things, right? I have that same right. So something needs to happen, just like it did in the middle school, because we're forgetting, you guys. We're educators, right? I don't know how many.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Ma'am,
For the policy of open forum, it has to be addressed to the school
okay,
committee.
so let me address you.
Yep.
Okay.
Please do.
What I'm trying to tell you is, why can't we do what we did in the middle school at the high school? Because you're forgetting that not every child is the same, okay? You're talking to a person that deals with a lot of special needs people in our family. So what about those students that pull out those books that don't have the same mindset that other students have? And they're reading material like that. It is not okay. It is not okay to give access to all the students thinking they think the same way, okay? Because if my family member who has certain circumstances came home with that book, it would be a different story, you guys. You have to remember, these kids are all different, okay? One 18-year-old that's sitting here that's going away to college is not the same as a person that's had an IEP for four years. It's my choice as a parent to figure out what that person is reading, okay? So you have to think of it that way. You're looking at these children as a blanket statement, and that's not the way life is. So why can't we do what we did at Coelho or what we did at all these other schools and do it at the high school? What difference does that make, having it in a separate section, pleasing all the parents that need to be pleased, and taking care of the parents that have bigger issues at home than having to worry about my child reading that? So I hope you kind of got the message, because I don't want to sit here on TV and say, you know, what I really want to say. I hope you got the message that these kids are not all the same. And for some kid that just doesn't know any better, to grab a book like that in a library without any supervision or any sort of, it's just common sense. I just wish that you guys would really think through this and forget about the anger and the anxiety and all that, and really just think through the whole process and how every single child that goes to the school is completely different from one another. Because we love to say that, but when it comes to things like this, we just do a blanket statement, like, we're not gonna do it because they're old enough. They're 16 through 18, they can make their own decisions. Well, guess what? You have a lot of kids in this school that can't make those decisions on their own. And now you're just putting these books out there so they can just do whatever with them. And you just threw away a lot of work that parents at home are doing. So thank you. Thank you for listening, and I hope you really take that to heart.
I won't take much of your time. I'm going to admit that I came into the meeting late because I heard that this topic was being discussed, and so I had to come down and hear for myself what was going on. And I just want to end the evening by saying you can't ban books. You can't take books out of the libraries. There are the amount of content in most of these books that is the kind of content that people are concerned about is tiny when you think about the number of pages there are in the book. I think it's also about books are a way that we encounter the world and we understand human experience. They are a way that we understand other perspectives, that we see the world from outside of ourselves, which is something that is so essential to teenagers. Are there books that my children have read that I wasn't a huge fan of? Sure, but then they're an opportunity for a conversation. And if I, there was and when they were younger, I would talk to them about every book that they were going to read before they started reading it, right? I had resources I was using to figure out if I thought that book was the right thing for my 8-year-old to be reading. Sometimes the answer was no, let's wait until you're a little bit older. But removing books from a library sends us down a slippery slope that is dangerous. Honestly, I'm more concerned about the access you guys give my kids to YouTube on their Chromebooks than I do about any books in the library. You can't ban books. You can't remove the books. There is nothing there that is really pornography. It can't. It isn't. There are scenes in these books that might borderline on graphic. They might describe sexual encounters between minors, but they have been books like this for a very long time. As someone who has taught Chaucer, we can
Excuse me. No, everyone gave everyone time to speak. I'd ask that you do the same, please. Thank you.
Are we going to stop teaching Chaucer? Are we going to stop teaching Shakespeare? Because we start down this road that's very good.
Thank you.
Today, and I also thank the attendees for their time and attention today for what seems to be a pretty delicate issue. But from listening to both sides, I think that at the end of the day, it sounds like everybody is concerned with children learning and kind of a preservation of innocence, so to speak. And I think that is a noble goal, but maybe not necessarily one that is morally right fully. John Stuart Mill, famous philosopher said that, you know, our job as human beings is to reduce harm. To live in a society is to reduce the greatest amount of harm to everybody. But in reducing harm, that does not free you from being offended. And I think that it's important to kind of separate what is offensive from what is harmful, or kind of look at it as, sure, there may be things that when looked at subjectively or individually, these things might be obscene, these things might be shocking to us, but how does that tell an overarching story? Could a student or somebody that's reading these books that has, you know, a super violent scene depicting bullying, learn something from that? Say, hey, you know, how did this character handle this? How did this character grow from this? Is this something that if I ever experienced, I would have, you know, now context to see what I could do about it? If there's somebody that looks at sexual content that could be going through something horrible at home, that could say, I didn't know that I'm not supposed to be touched that way. What can I do about this? There is value in shocking content. And I think that if parents or guardians have concerns, first and foremost is having conversations at the dinner table, which I think both sides can agree, more people need to have that. I'm not a parent yet myself, but I think back to what worked for me when I was a child. I had extremely questionable taste in music as a child, and to combat that, my single mother, anytime I came home with a CD, would say, okay, let me please see this. She'd look at the band name. She'd look at some of the titles of the tracks. If it included a lyric book, she would flip through that. And if there was anything that was particularly challenging content, she would say, let's have a little bit of a conversation as to why you're looking at this. Let's have a little bit of a conversation as to what you're getting from this. And I get it, a parent's job is not easy, and it's full of balancing multiple plates. But if we're going to be concerned parents and concerned members of the community, we have to approach the conversation in good faith, and we have to be willing to have those difficult conversations and willing to say, you know, why are you interested in this topic? Why did you get this book? May I flip through that, you know, before you start reading it? Can I do a little bit of research? Can I Google this author? Can I Google, you know, whether they have a particular agenda, whether they have a political view that, you know, you and I might need to have a further conversation about? And, you know, I agree that there is accountability on both sides as a school department that is funded by the public's taxes, and so the library purchases, et cetera, are in turn funded by those taxes. It's not solely the school's responsibility, especially when the Attleboro High School is connected to the sales network, and if a student wants to get a book, they'll get a book. You know, I think that, excuse me, I shouldn't. Superintendent Sawyer seemed to clarify, saying that there were some policies that are in place and policies that are in the works to kind of create age-restricted sections. And I think that if that pleases the parents, it's a good way moving forward. However, that's not going to stop the curiosity that's fostered in students for looking at these materials, especially if, you know, they look up to an older student that says this book was profound, or you're not going to believe this. One of the books that had a profound impact on me, I read when I was here as a senior, and it was The Handmaid's Tale. And growing up under a, for lack of a better term, Christian conservative father, there's no way he would have let me read that book. But then, you know, reading it really provided an interesting perspective onto how things were going to go, or the plight of women and things like that. So that's a really important experience for me that, you know, if he had been the sole person in the household controlling what I had access to, I don't know if I would have even had that experience. Sorry, don't mean to take up time here. On my way here, this is a small anecdote. I was thinking about things that could have been perceived as obscene, but maybe not have been. And in front of me at a red light, there was a moving company truck called Two Guys, One Truck. And I was sitting there saying, well, is this obscene, or is this my own mind creating this obscenity? You know, not to be vulgar, but, you know, these questions are there where it's like when you don't consider the work in its entirety, whether or not something is obscene, you know, is relative. And at the end of the day, I think that parents need to just look at the curriculum that
has been put forward, see the list of books that's been put forward, and understand that the line of responsibility not necessarily ends, but becomes gray when supplemental materials that the students can seek out themselves, are not things that are on this list. I had a few other points, but I thought the conversation was going to go a slight different way, so I'm going to conclude on that, but I thank everybody for being here.
My name is Megan Domenici, and I live at 15 Sienna Road, and I don't have a problem saying that. If it wasn't so utterly disgusting, it would be almost laughable that in 2023 we are back to talking about banning books. Books. One of our oldest, most long-lasting, and personal ways of passing education down through the generations, of developing empathy in a person through numerous genres, while being able to speak to millions at a time, no celebrity needed. Nazis banned and burned books. The apartheid regime of South Africa banned books. The Chinese Communist Party censors what its people may read. The Russian government has banned and is currently banning books right now. This year, people have fled that country for simply having leaked the list of banned books. The strict censorship of North Korea is notorious the world over. The last time I checked, the respectable people of the world were not trying to be more like those groups. Let's talk about the semantics of banning books versus keeping certain titles out of the library, because I've heard it said that that is what is happening here. The legal definition of book banning is a form of censorship that occurs when private individuals, government officials, or organizations remove books from libraries, school reading lists, or bookstore shelves because they object to their content, ideas, or themes. That's exactly what some are instigating here. If you can't be honest about your actions, if you can't call a spade, is there shame in that? I suppose if any good can come from others trying to force their conservative and religious beliefs on public education, it can be that I have found some wonderful and enlightening new books to read. I've rediscovered a book that changed me for the better as a human, books that educate and develop empathy and help an individual more fully comprehend the human experience, as glorious and horrifying as it may be. So I have read both Genderqueer, a memoir, and All Boys Aren't Blue this weekend. I have them right here. No excerpts from the internet. Both are books folks in the city want banned from the public schools. Both are excellent. Both are written specifically for the high school age group. I can see how both or either could be absolute lifelines for someone who feels like they don't know who they are or how they fit in the world. Both are brave, vulnerable resources neither author had at their own disposal while growing up. These authors should be thanked for doing the emotional labor for the sake of others. So many more people than just the LGBTQIA+ community can learn and should learn from these books and others like them. We can all be better people. Are there explanations of sexual experiences the authors had? Yep. Are they pornographic? Absolutely not. The legal definition of pornography is pictures and/or writings of sexual activity intended solely to excite lascivious feelings of a particularly blatant and aberrational kind, such as acts involving children, animals, orgies, and all types of sexual intercourse. It has been defined as explicit sexual material that is created and intended to cause sexual arousal. To label accounts of sexual assault as pornography displays an appalling amount of insensitivity and ignorance, also privilege. I can only assume and thank the universe that someone who thinks this way has never been victimized. I am more than fully confident that if I tried to impose my political and religious beliefs on other people's children, or a whole town, a state, or a country full of them, I would be met with raucous protest, because that is not something we do here. It is one of the great aspects of living in this country, that whole separation of church and state bit. When you send your children through the public education system, you accept it for what it is. Are there exceptions and tweaks to be made? Of course, and there are here. Read the handbooks. If you don't like them, private schools and homeschooling options are widely available. Take care of your own family, and I will take care of mine.
Please, no comments from the audience, please. Anyone else?